Good morning, students. The story we are going to discuss today is The Selfish Giant, written by Oscar Wilde. So let me first tell you briefly about this story. There was once a giant who had a very beautiful garden, a garden full of beautiful trees and beautiful flowers used to bloom in those trees. Children used to play in the giant's garden while returning from school. They enjoyed a lot inside the giant's garden. Birds sang melodiously. There were 12 peach trees which were full of pink pearls, right? Blossoms which looked like pink pearls, right? And it was indeed a very beautiful garden. The giant had gone to visit his friend the Cornish ogre. When he returned, he saw the children playing inside the garden. As I told you earlier, the giant was extremely selfish. He drove the children out of the garden and he built a huge wall around the garden and put up a notice: trespassers will be prosecuted, meaning that anyone who enters the garden without permission would be punished. So the giant did not allow the children to play inside the garden. Nature decided to punish the giant for his selfishness. So it was perpetual winter in the giant's garden. In all the other gardens, spring came, but in the giant's garden, it was always winter. Of course, gardens are most beautiful in spring when they are full of flowers, right? Beautiful, colorful flowers. But unfortunately, in the giant's garden, it was always harsh and cold winter. So after many days, the giant saw that a bird was singing inside his garden, and he saw once more spring had returned to his garden. Then he realized that through a hole in the wall which he had built, some children had come inside the garden. Because the children had returned to the garden, spring had also returned to the garden. Only in one corner of the garden it was still winter. In that corner, a little child was standing and crying bitterly because he was too short to climb on the tree. The giant took the child up in his arms and placed him on the tree. The child was very happy and he put his arms around the giant's neck and kissed him. The giant's heart melted. He had a change of heart. The giant understood that he had been selfish. He broke down the walls of the garden and allowed the children to play in his garden once more. After many years, when the giant had grown old, he saw the little child once more. The little child had marks of wound on his hands and feet. The giant was furious. He wanted to punish whoever had inflicted those wounds on the child. The child smiled and said, "Nay, these are the wounds of love." And the child said that once you let me play in your garden, now I will take you to my garden, that is paradise. Soon the giant died and his face had a happy smile, so he died peacefully. The little boy was none other than Jesus Christ, who took the giant to paradise. So now we are going to discuss this story through a PowerPoint presentation which I have prepared. The Selfish Giant, the story of a magical transformation, a change of heart. The giant had a beautiful garden. Every day while returning from school, the children would visit the giant's garden. They played merrily inside the garden. You can see in the picture, the children were very happy playing inside the garden. The garden was most beautiful in spring. There were peach trees, 12 peach trees full of blossoms which were pink in color. They looked like pink pearls. Okay? So these are peach trees. The children enjoyed themselves in the garden. They enjoyed the fragrance of beautiful flowers and delicious fruits while playing in the garden. They also listened to the melodious songs of the birds. In spring, the garden was full of pink and pearl-colored peach blossoms. There were 12 peach trees in the garden. Description of the garden in spring. It was a large, lovely garden covered with soft, lush green grass. There were beautiful and colorful flowers shining like stars. The 12 peach trees were full of blossoms of pink and pearl. Right? In spring, they were covered with blossoms. In autumn, they would be laden with fruits. The sweet fragrance of flowers and delicious fruits filled the air. In spring, melodious songs of birds were also heard inside the giant's garden. The giant had gone to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre. Ogre is another type of giant. So, this is a picture of the giant. The giant was very selfish. After 7 years, when the giant had returned from his friend's house, he was furious to see the children playing in his garden. He roughly drove the children out of his garden. Because he was extremely selfish, he did not want the children to play in his garden, and he drove them out of his garden. He told them to get out of his garden. The children were frightened and ran away. The giant said that the garden belonged to him, and so only he could play inside the garden. So he built a huge wall around the garden and put up a notice. It was written on the notice, trespassers would be prosecuted. Trespassers will be prosecuted, meaning anyone who enters without permission will be punished. You can see, trespassers will be prosecuted. The children were now very unhappy. The children did not like to play on the stony and dusty roads. They missed playing in the giant's lovely garden. The children, symbolic of youth, vitality, joy, cheerfulness, vibrant colors, of course associated with the season spring. Mother Nature decided to punish the giant for his selfishness. Now, Nature decided to punish the giant for his selfish act of driving the children out of his garden. The children were sad as he did not allow them to enter and play in his garden. Mother Nature decided to punish the giant for his selfishness. Because the giant had driven the children out of his garden, spring, which is a very beautiful season when nature is at its most beautiful, refused to enter the giant's garden. Spring did not visit the giant's garden. It was always winter inside the giant's garden after the children were driven out. Contrast between spring and winter. You can see very well from the picture. Snow, hail, frost and north wind were the visitors to the giant's garden in winter. Snow, hail, frost and north wind. Snow, frost, hail and north wind were visitors in the giant's garden in winter. Snow, frost, hail and north wind have been personified. Personification meaning attribution of human characteristics or qualities to something non-human. Snow. Snow has been compared to a lady wearing a huge white cloak. Snow looks like white sheets covering the giant's garden. So you can see the point of comparison. So snow compared to a lady or woman's white cloak. Frost painted all the trees silver. North wind rode through the garden and broke down chimney pots. So this is the effect which the north wind had. Hail. Hail rattled on the roof of the castle for 3 hours every day and broke most of the slates. Once a small flower peeped through the snow. However, the little flower was sad to see the children still missing from the garden and went into the ground after seeing the notice board. What was written on the notice board? Trespassers will be prosecuted. The children were not allowed to enter the garden. One morning, after many days, the giant heard some lovely music. It was a little linnet, linnet is a bird, singing in the garden. The giant smelled the fragrance of flowers and thought that spring had arrived at last. The giant saw a most wonderful sight. The children had crept in through a hole in the wall and were sitting on the trees and playing in the garden. The trees were full of flowers and blossoms and swayed gently as if dancing in joy. With the return of the children, spring too returned to the giant's garden. You can see the picture of the children creeping in through the hole in the wall in the giant's garden. Spring had returned to the garden. However, in one corner of the garden, it was still winter. A little boy who was too short to climb the tree was crying bitterly. On seeing this, the giant's heart melted, and he picked up the boy and put him on the branches of the tree. So the giant helped the little boy to climb the tree. The giant had a change of heart, so he understood that he had been very selfish. The little boy thanked the giant by putting his little arms around the giant's neck and kissing him. The giant broke down the wall he had built around the garden. He now considered the children to be the most beautiful flowers of his garden and played with them. The giant not only broke the wall and allowed the children to play in his garden, but the giant himself joined the children in their games and sports. They were very happy inside the garden. The giant missed the little child who had kissed him. He asked the other children about him, but no one knew about him. The little child did not return to his garden. With time, the giant grew old and used to sit on a chair and watch the children playing in his garden. One day, the little child returned to the giant's garden. The giant was delighted. The giant was very happy to see the little boy once again. However, the giant was furious to see the wound marks in the form of marks of nails on the boy's hands and feet. So that little boy had returned to the giant's garden, but there were injury marks on his hands and feet, marks of nails. The Giant and Jesus Christ. This is a poem which I have composed to make you understand this particular story. The giant and Jesus Christ. The old giant found marks of wounds on the child's hands and feet. Annoyed, he wanted to punish whoever had done it. "Nay, these are the wounds of love," said the child, turning around. Hearing this, the giant's wonder knew no bounds. The little boy wanted to take the giant to paradise, for the time had come for the giant's demise. The old giant died after a little while. Flowers covered his body. His face bore a happy smile. The little one was Jesus Christ in the guise of a boy who loved one and all and brought to the world peace and joy. Okay? The little boy said the marks were wounds of love. The boy said that since the giant had let him play in his garden, he would now take the giant back to his own garden, that is paradise. Symbolism. There is a lot of symbolism in this story. 12 peach trees representing 12 apostles or disciples of Jesus. Winter, Christmas, associated with Christmas, birth of Christ. Spring, resurrection of nature. As you know, Christ was resurrected. Paradise, marks of nails on the boy's hands and feet. Christ was crucified. So we understand that the boy, the little boy, was none other than Jesus Christ. Apostles of Jesus. The little boy was none other than Jesus Christ. Jesus was the savior of humanity. Okay? The giant lay dead. His body was covered with white blossoms. His face was full of bliss or happiness because Christ, God Himself, had taken him to paradise. So this is a picture. You can imagine that this is the paradise where the giant went. Thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation.